Look at this glorious set of legendary gaming systems. The Sega Genesis, the Super Nintendo. This rivalry defined my formative years as a gamer. It's just too bad they look like blurry garbage on modern televisions. But wait, what's this? It's the Hyperkin RetroN 5. The RetroN 5 is the latest in a long line of clone consoles from Hyperkin. But is it the greatest? It's bulky and a little ridiculous, but I actually rather like the look of it. It is also available in a black color scheme, but that reminded me more of a Dell computer from 2002 than an awesome retro gaming system. In addition to cartridge ports for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, it also boasts compatibility with Nintendo Entertainment System game packs. This slot is for Famicom cartridges, but unfortunately I don't actually have any of those. It can also play Sega Master System games, but we'll get to that in a minute. And here at the front, there is a slot for Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games. That wide range of compatibility is impressive, but we're actually just getting started. There are a total of 6 controller ports on this thing, 2 each for the NES, Super NES, and Genesis. The console also comes with its own wireless controller, which docks in the back here. It's not completely awful, but I don't really see the point. Plus, my unit came with a bit of a derpy, broken thumbstick. See, there's your first problem, Hyperkin. These games are made for D-pads. Fortunately, the fact that it has all these controller ports makes it a moot point. I'd say the biggest selling point for this thing would have to be its native 720p HDMI output. The operating system is very transparently a customized Android shell, and when you plug in a cartridge, it gets dumped to temporary memory, and it runs in an emulator. It is also the most clingy game system I've ever had. In spite of the SD card slot on the back, there is currently no way to play ROMs, so unless you have the original carts, this may not be the system for you. Fortunately, I've still got a few. Let's take a look at Mega Man 2 for the NES. Games look extremely good through the RetroN 5, and because this is emulated, there's also a high degree of customability. You can set graphic filters, screen size, enhance the audio, use save states and fast forwarding, and use any controller that's connected to the system, regardless of the game. Yeah, Metal Blades! It's a good thing Mega Man doesn't have actual Metal Blades in the upcoming Smash Bros. Game. Nobody else would have a chance. Every NES game I tried worked perfectly in the RetroN 5, but this is a good time to point out one thing you won't be doing with it. Playing light gun games. Yeah, Duck Hunt loads, but light guns don't actually work with our newfangled HD TVs, and old CRTs didn't tend to have HDMI ports. The Sega Genesis is notoriously difficult to emulate accurately, but the RetroN 5 pulls it off with aplomb. At first, some of the sound in Sonic 2 seemed a little off, but disabling enhanced sound made it sound more or less pitch perfect. I adore Sonic 2. It was the first video game I ever owned, and it's because of how familiar I am with it that I feel comfortable saying there's a tiny little bit of input lag on this thing. I only really notice it on fast-paced games that I know like the back of my hand, but it's definitely there. And yeah, I know HD TVs tend to induce input lag all by themselves, but I've got a PC hooked up to this same TV, and emulating games on it doesn't give me quite as much lag. It's probably not a deal breaker, and unless you really have a feel for a game, you might not even notice it. But that right there may well be another benefit to taking the emulation route. Any nitpicks I have with this thing may be stamped out through firmware updates. And speaking of nitpicks and feels, here is Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Here is Sonic and Knuckles. When you combine them, you create the greatest video game the world has ever known. Or at the very least, my favorite one. But it is incompatible with the RetroN 5. In fact, any case where you have to make one cart piggyback on another doesn't work. Now in most cases, like with the Super Game Boy and Game Genie, it doesn't really matter. The RetroN 5 has a cheat system built in, and of course it plays Game Boy games anyway, but I really hope Sonic & Knuckles has its lock-on technology fixed with an update. And it looks like I got my wish. I scripted all this, then went to record Sonic 3 and Knuckles failing to launch, and yet, it loaded up with no problem. I hadn't actually tried it since doing the first firmware upgrade. Sonic 2 and Knuckles still didn't work, nor did the Blue Spheres game you get when you plug in any other cart. But still, this fix shows what a strength this is for the RetroN 5. The Sega Power Base converter makes the system look even more ridiculous, but it actually does work, and it gives you full Master System functionality. I'm a little bit surprised we got a Famicom port instead of this, but I guess it makes sense. I already had the Power Base converter, but I needed to buy one Master System game just to test out. The only one I could find for sale locally was Wonder Boy 3: The Dragon's Trap. And it's actually a really fun game in its own right, and it seems to work perfectly. Original Game Boy games run just as well, but it is a little disappointing that you don't get more options to customize their colors. Super Game Boy compatible games will always run in their enhanced modes, meaning you'll never get to hear Pauline scream. Wait, no, I mean, Some of you classic Geek Critique fans may remember that once upon a time, this channel featured a person named Kalen, whose superpower was being very, very bad at video games. Here we see his childhood copy of Pokemon Red running on the RetroN 5. Thus far, he's put 25 hours into the game, collected 21 Pokemon, and seems to be stuck in Mount Moon. Kalen, wherever you are, we're all thinking of you. The Game Boy Color exclusive games work just as well, and... wait a minute. Why am I even bothering playing Donkey Kong Country on Game Boy Color? There we go, that's better. The Super Nintendo isn't normally too hard to emulate, but it's always been a challenge to make it work with the myriad of specialized chips that later games had. The whole of the Donkey Kong Country series played well, and it provides me a good excuse to talk about another cool feature: save data importing. The first time you insert a game cart with battery backup, the RetroN 5 automatically copies your save data to its own internal storage. This is awesome for a few reasons. For one, some of my save data is nearly 2 decades old, and with this, you can preserve it long past the life of the cartridge's battery. And, in cases where the cart's battery has died, like with my copy of Super Metroid, the RetroN 5 totally removes the dependency on battery backup. It also has a function to upload your save data back onto the cartridge, but that still seemed a little unreliable with some games. Here's the original version of Star Fox, running perfectly with the Super FX chip. Here's Kirby Superstar, showcasing the SA1 chip. Super Mario RPG uses the same chip and runs just as well. And finally, here's Yoshi's Island, running fine with the Super FX 2 chip. I don't have the game, but I understand that Street Fighter Alpha 2, which uses the SDG1 chip, doesn't currently get past the opening screen. But enough about chips, it's time for the Game Boy Advance. It's a little bit weird being able to play games so much newer than everything else on this thing, but hey, I'm not complaining. Okay, maybe I should. Game Boy Advance cards hold a lot more data than anything else on this system, and as such they tend to take quite a while longer to dump to system memory. Once they do though, emulation seems to be extremely well done. The only hiccup I ran into with GBA games was in Dragon Ball Z Legacy of Goku 2. It worked fine to a point, but it dumps you back to the title screen when you attempt to fly anywhere. I seem to remember this being an issue that a lot of PC emulators had with the game, so it should be able to be fixed in a patch. One more disappointment when it comes to the hardware is that you can't insert multiple carts at once. The UI suspiciously makes it look like you should be able to select your system, so again, there may be a patch for this. Overall, I'd say that the Hyperkin RetroN 5 is a worthwhile investment in the past, especially if you have plenty of carts you're hanging on to. Or at least it would be a worthwhile investment if you could find one for what I paid for it. I pre-ordered mine back in February for $99, and it's honestly a steal at that price. But Hyperkin later bumped it up to, I believe, $150, and since it's brand new and currently sold out, it's being subjected to some pretty insane reseller hikes right now. The RetroN 5 is not quite perfect, but with a feature set this strong and the potential for those kinks to be ironed out, it is a great way to play a huge library of classic games. But if you're anything like me, I know what you're thinking. Where is the Gamecom port? And you know, lots of people have 3D TVs nowadays, so let's add Virtual Boy compatibility while we're at it. If we can play Master System, there's no reason not to have a Game Gear slot as well. Let's see, it plays Genesis games, but what about the next level? Let's give it 32X compatibility. And if we're doing that, might as well give it a Sega CD add-on port while we're at it. There we go, the console of our dreams. Hyperkin, make it happen. If you have any questions, comments, or just weird things you'd like me to try with the RetroN 5, let me know. But I don't do too weird. Check out these retrospectives, throw your likes and follows and subscribes all over the place, and you keep geeking, we'll keep critiquing. Thanks for watching. No, I'm not bored with you, Jesus! Gonna have to get a restraining order for a games console, can you even do that?